You hit update on your brand new Samsung laptop and watch your C drive disappear. Your $1,500 machine turns to scrap, not because of a hacker, not because of a virus, but because of a routine security update from Microsoft. And the worst part? Bill Gates, the man who literally built Windows, saw this coming. He wrote it down in a memo 23 years ago. Microsoft filed it away and forgot it existed. Now in 2026, everything he warned about is happening at once. And Samsung, one of the biggest names in consumer electronics, just made a move that is shaking Microsoft to its core. At CES 2026, while every other major manufacturer was still doubling down on Windows on ARM, Samsung quietly walked away. No press conference, no announcement, no statement. They just left. Microsoft had spent years promising that ARM-based Windows laptops would be the future. Thinner designs, all-day battery life, always connected. The pitch sounded great. The product was a disaster. Driver support was broken. App compatibility was a daily nightmare. Enterprise software refused to cooperate. Developers ignored the platform completely. Samsung watched all of it play out and made the call. When a company that size exits an ecosystem without even making a scene about it, that silence is the loudest signal in the industry. Then came March 2026 and Microsoft handed Samsung the most embarrassing public moment of the year. A small pre-installed app called Galaxy Connect, designed simply to link your Galaxy Book to your phone, had leftover data from previous versions buried deep inside the system. When Microsoft pushed their February security update KB5077181, Windows flagged that buried data as a threat and locked users out of their own C drive. Thousands of people woke up and couldn't open their own files. Microsoft's official fix? Log in as administrator, manually change ownership of every single file on the drive, run a batch file, then restart. That is not a patch. That is emergency surgery on a system that was supposed to be the most trusted computing platform on the planet. Laptops retailing between $1,200 and $1,800, bought by students with deadlines, professionals with years of work stored on those drives, all of it locked away. Not because they did anything wrong. Because of one line of code they didn't even know existed on their own device. Corporate damage was on another level entirely. IT managers arrived at work to find entire floors frozen on the same access-denied screen. Industry estimates put the average cost of IT downtime at $5,600 per minute for large enterprises. Some offices were down for 2 to 3 full days. And this is where the structural problem becomes impossible to ignore. Samsung built the hardware. Samsung sold the hardware. But Samsung has zero control over Microsoft's update mechanism. One broken update and Samsung's brand takes the damage for a problem rooted entirely inside Microsoft's system. That is the Windows OEM relationship in its rawest form, and it has never been exposed this clearly in a single incident. But the Galaxy Connect disaster didn't happen in isolation. It landed inside a year where Microsoft's relationship with its users collapsed faster than at any point in company history. Microsoft made Copilot mandatory. Every new Windows 11 laptop now requires a dedicated Copilot key on the keyboard just to receive AI PC certification. Background Copilot processes ran continuously, consuming memory and CPU on hardware that already had higher requirements than its predecessor. Windows Recall, a feature that took continuous screenshots of everything you did on your screen so AI could search your activity, was announced, triggered a privacy backlash within days, was pulled, redesigned, and re-released as an opt-in beta that still never recovered its reputation. The term microslop went viral globally. Pavan Divuluri, Windows president, posted publicly about plans to turn Windows into an agentic OS in November 2025, and the replies were so negative he disabled comments entirely. A product leader turning off public comments on an official announcement is not a communication strategy. It is a retreat. Back in 2002, Bill Gates sat down and wrote a memo called Trustworthy Computing and sent it to every single Microsoft employee. In it, he warned his own company that pushing system-level updates without proper coordination with hardware manufacturers would eventually create failures so severe they would destroy user trust permanently. Microsoft filed it away. 23 years later, that is exactly what happened on Galaxy Book laptops across the world. The internet noticed immediately. Forums exploded with threads titled, "Gates predicted this exact disaster." A man who hasn't worked at Microsoft in nearly 2 decades understanding its update infrastructure better than the team currently running it. Meanwhile, the Linux migration is not a theory anymore. It is a measurable event. Microsoft ended mainstream security support for Windows 10 on October 14, 2025. The machines that couldn't meet Windows 11's hardware requirements numbered in the hundreds of millions globally. Zorin OS 18 recorded 6-figure downloads in its opening window, the majority coming directly from Windows systems. StatCounter tracked Linux desktop share at roughly 5% in the US by mid-2025. Google Trends data from February 2026 shows searches for "how to install Linux" at an all-time high globally, running approximately 5 times the volume of the preceding month. That is not curiosity. That is a migration event in progress. And Samsung is already preparing for that world. A community developer named Joshua Giesham built a driver called Samsung Galaxy Book specifically to unlock hardware-level features on Galaxy Books running Linux: keyboard backlight controls, battery charge management, performance profiles. Features that were Windows only for years. Samsung didn't build this. Samsung didn't fund it. But Samsung also hasn't stopped it. When the community starts building serious Linux infrastructure for your hardware and the manufacturer stays completely out of the way, you are watching a platform migration begin before it has been officially announced. Every Windows license costs Samsung money. Every Windows update cycle creates compatibility work. Every Windows-specific failure generates Samsung support tickets for a problem Samsung cannot control. Linux eliminates all of it. Bill Gates built an empire on one assumption, that no alternative to Windows could ever reach the critical mass needed to threaten its dominance. That assumption held for 30 years because it was mostly true for 30 years. The conditions that made it true are gone. Samsung stepping away from Windows ARM, tolerating community Linux driver development on Galaxy Book hardware, and watching Galaxy Connect destroy user trust without any ability to prevent it. That is not a company that believes the old assumptions still hold. The question is not whether Samsung's move is significant. The question is whether Microsoft has any answer left that is big enough to stop what is already in motion. Drop a comment below. Have you already switched to Linux? And if you haven't, after everything you just heard, what are you still waiting for?
You know, there's been a lot of talk recently about people installing Linux on their computers to get away from Windows and Mac.
If you have a regular Android phone, then clearly you have no privacy. Most of the spying and surveillance on our lives are done on these phones.
Android just doesn't work for me anymore on many different levels, and that sucks.
Bill Gates once stood in front of the world and admitted something that shocked everyone. He said missing Android was the single greatest mistake of his career. The man who built the most dominant software empire in history, the man who crushed IBM, buried Netscape, and put a Windows PC in every home on Earth, said he blew it. He missed mobile. And now in 2026, the platform that replaced him is starting to feel the same heat. Because Linux phones are here. They work. And neither Google, Apple, nor Microsoft has a single answer for what's coming. Let's talk about what a Linux phone actually is because most people have no idea. The Librem 5 made by Purism is one of the most radical pieces of consumer hardware built in the last decade. It runs Pure OS, a fully open-source operating system built on Linux. Every line of code is public. Anyone can inspect it, audit it, modify it. But the hardware is where it gets insane. The Librem 5 has physical kill switches built directly into the chassis. 3 separate switches. One cuts power to the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card. One cuts the cellular modem. One physically disconnects the cameras and microphone. Not a software toggle. Not a permission setting. A hardware switch that cuts electrical power. When that switch is flipped, there is no software backdoor on Earth that can turn those components back on. That is a completely different security model than anything Android or iOS has ever offered. Then there is the Pine phone from Pine64, starting at around $150. A fully open hardware Linux phone that the community can repair, modify, and flash with dozens of different operating systems including Ubuntu Touch, Postmarket OS, and Sailfish OS. The battery is replaceable. The back cover comes off. Components are modular. This phone is built to last 10 years, not 2. Now why does this matter right now in 2026? Because people are waking up to what their phone actually does to them. The average person carries their smartphone 18 hours a day. It tracks location with precision that would have required a dedicated surveillance team 30 years ago. It knows spending patterns, health data, communication history, and behavioral patterns. Google and Apple built what are essentially toll roads. Every app that reaches users on iPhone passes through Apple's review system. Every major Android app flows through Google Play. Every purchase gets taxed at 30%. Epic Games sued Apple over this exact commission structure. Spotify lobbied regulators across Europe and the United States over the same issue. The EU's Digital Markets Act forced Apple to allow alternative app stores in European markets for the first time in iPhone history. These are not side stories. They are the system cracking under its own weight. And Linux phones are the only platform that solves this at the root. No mandatory store. No commission. No approval bottleneck. No single corporation deciding which software is allowed to exist. Here is what changed. Early Linux phones were proof of concept devices. Fascinating but barely functional. That era is finished. In 2026, calling works, messaging works, cameras work, navigation works, media playback work. The Waydroid project allows Android apps to run inside a Linux environment without giving up the open architecture underneath. It is not emulation with performance penalties. It is Android's application layer running as a contained process inside a Linux system. The app gap that killed Windows Phone, BlackBerry, and Palm before them is no longer the death sentence it once was. Dock a Librem 5 or a supported Pine phone to a monitor, plug in a keyboard and mouse, and you get a full Linux desktop environment. One device. One operating system. Full mobile capability and full desktop capability. Microsoft chased this exact vision with Windows 10 Mobile Continuum and failed completely before Windows Phone died in 2017. The Linux community kept building quietly. And it actually works now. The movement growing around this is impossible to ignore. Hoya, the Finnish company behind Sailfish OS, has spent years signing contracts with governments across Europe, Asia, and South America who need mobile infrastructure they can audit and control locally. The concern is concrete. If Google revokes a country's Android licensing, that nation's smartphone ecosystem faces an immediate crisis. A Linux mobile stack that governments can inspect, modify, and host on their own servers is not a consumer product. It is a strategic national asset. Meanwhile, the same energy driving people off Windows 11 is driving people off lockdown Android. The Windows recall disaster showed what happens when a corporation embeds surveillance into the operating system and gets caught. Users did not forget. They started asking the same question about their phones. And when they looked closely at what Android and iOS were doing with AI pipelines, on-device behavioral modeling, and real-time data collection in 2026, the answer made a lot of them very uncomfortable. This is why Bill Gates is watching something deeply painful unfold. He admitted missing Android was catastrophic. He watched Microsoft burn billions on Windows Phone only to shut it down by 2017. He warned his own leadership team that mobile would define computing long-term. They did not listen fast enough. Now Linux, the open-source movement Microsoft spent years fighting on desktops, is attacking from two directions simultaneously. It is replacing Windows on desktops and laptops. And it is now offering a genuine alternative to Android and iPhone in the pocket. The same volunteer-built, community-driven, nobody-owns-it software that Gates once tried to eliminate is now the most dangerous idea in the entire technology industry. The phones exist. The privacy is real. The locks on Android and iPhone are visible now in a way they never were before. And once people see the cage, they cannot unsee it.
Exploit uses a local privilege escalation vulnerability in various Microsoft Windows versions.
Right now, in March 2026, there are 240 million computers running Windows 10 with zero security protection. No patches. No fixes. Nothing. These aren't forgotten machines in a basement. They're the computers people are using today at work, at school, in hospitals. And the reason they're unprotected isn't a technical failure. It's a deliberate decision Microsoft made years ago that is now blowing up in their face. Here is what actually happened. When Microsoft announced Windows 11 in 2021, they quietly buried a hardware requirement most people had never heard of, TPM 2.0, a security chip built into motherboards. If your computer didn't have it, you couldn't upgrade. Period. They also blocked any Intel processor older than 8th generation and any AMD Ryzen older than the 2000 series. That sounds reasonable until you realize what that actually means. A 2019 computer with an Intel i7-8700K and 32 GB of RAM blocked. A 2018 custom-built gaming PC with an RTX 3080, not compatible. A 2017 workstation that cost $4,000, declared obsolete. Microsoft's own numbers show this locked out 52% of all Windows 10 computers. That's not a small edge case. That's half the user base, told their machines are garbage. And here's what makes this worse. Tech researchers actually tested Windows 11 on those blocked machines. Intel 6th Gen, 7th Gen, AMD Ryzen 1000 series. It ran perfectly. No crashes, no performance issues, nothing. Linus Tech Tips benchmarked it directly and found zero difference between 6th Gen and 8th Gen performance inside Windows 11. The restriction isn't technical. It's artificial. A leaked account of a Microsoft executive meeting from 2020 describes someone saying out loud that requiring new hardware would force a refresh cycle, because their OEM partners needed PC sales and the market had gone flat. Someone said the quiet part out loud, and Microsoft went ahead with it anyway. On October 14, 2025, Windows 10 support ended. 240 million computers stopped receiving security patches overnight. For the people stuck on those machines, Microsoft offered one solution: pay $61 per computer per year for extended security updates, with the price doubling every year after that. For a single home user, that's annoying. For a business with hundreds of computers, it's a financial crisis. One midsize company with 3,000 incompatible computers is looking at $183,000 in year one alone, rising to $549,000 by year 3. A small dental practice in Ohio with just 12 computers that can't afford new hardware is paying $5,124 over 3 years, and at the end of those 3 years, they still need new computers because ESU expires. The owner told local news that Microsoft is extorting them. A manufacturing company in Wisconsin has 800 computers running software that only works on Windows 10. The software vendor hasn't released a Windows 11 version yet. They can't upgrade the OS, can't replace the computers, and are paying $341,600 just to keep using machines they already own. The hardest cases are the ones that had no budget for any of this. A rural school district in Pennsylvania has 4,200 student computers. None of them meet Windows 11 requirements. Replacing them costs $2.1 million. Their entire annual IT budget is $340,000. The school board met in emergency session and made the only decision they could: accept the security risk, keep running unpatched Windows 10, and spend the next 3 to 5 years trying to fundraise for new hardware. A rural hospital in Nebraska, 180 beds, serving 34,000 people, found that 387 of their 420 computers can't run Windows 11. Replacing them at medical-grade prices costs $1.24 million. Their total annual IT budget is $890,000 for everything. And under HIPAA, running unsupported software on machines that access patient data is a compliance violation. They're not choosing between good options. They're choosing which disaster to accept. The security threat is not theoretical. In February 2026, the security firm Sophos reported a new ransomware variant built specifically to exploit an unpatched Windows 10 vulnerability, one that Microsoft actually fixed in Windows 11 back in November 2025, but never patched for Windows 10 because support had already ended. The ransomware encrypts your files and demands $500 in Bitcoin. The success rate is high because there's nothing stopping it. Separately, Kaspersky identified a botnet actively scanning the internet for unpatched Windows 10 machines, with an estimated 340,000 computers already infected and being used for DDoS attacks and cryptocurrency mining. Security researcher Kevin Beaumont posted in February 2026 that this will be worse than Windows XP end of life. More machines, more connected, more damage potential. Troy Hunt, creator of Have I Been Pawned, warned in a blog post the same month that attackers are going after these machines aggressively and that, if you're running unsupported Windows 10 connected to the internet, you should assume you're already compromised. At least 7 major cyber insurers updated their policies in January and February 2026 to exclude breach claims from machines running end-of-life Windows 10. They're classifying it as negligence. And while all of this is happening publicly, inside Microsoft it's a different story. Leaked internal emails dated February 8, 2026 show the Windows division head ordering coordinated messaging to counter the backlash. The marketing team flagged that public perception is Microsoft abandoned 240 million users with working computers. The enterprise sales team reported that multiple Fortune 500 accounts are now evaluating Linux alternatives, directly citing Windows 11 requirements as the reason, and called the revenue risk substantial. On Microsoft's February 2026 earnings call, Satya Nadella was asked directly, 240 million PCs can't upgrade, how is that acceptable? He deflected. 3 class action lawsuits.
Alright guys, we've heard the customers loud and clear. They're sick of AI ruining our products.
And you know what? Microsoft kind of had to admit that, they're losing. Microsoft has to admit that they're actually losing.
The phone in your pocket right now is not yours. You paid for it, you carry it everywhere, you trust it with your messages, your photos, your bank details, but the software running inside it belongs to someone else. And that someone else is making billions off everything you do on it. That is not a theory. That is the business model. And right now, something is happening quietly that is starting to change all of that, and the people who built these mobile empires are not happy about it. Bill Gates once said that missing Android was the single greatest mistake of his career. Think about who said that. This is the man who crushed IBM, buried Netscape Navigator, and built Microsoft into the most dominant software company on Earth. He burned through billions on Windows Phone, attracted almost 0 developers, and watched the whole thing collapse in slow motion while Google took over mobile. And here is the worst part: Android runs on Linux. The exact same open-source technology that Microsoft spent years fighting and dismissing. He lost to the thing he ignored. And now in 2026, history is doing it again, one layer deeper. Linux phones are real. Not prototypes sitting in a developer's basement, not experiments for people who enjoy suffering. Real daily drivers. The Librem 5 from Purism. The Pine phone from Pine 64. Devices running Sailfish OS, Ubuntu Touch, Post-Market OS. In 2026, calling, messaging, web browsing, navigation, and media playback all work reliably on these platforms. People are choosing them deliberately, with full knowledge of what they give up, because what Linux gives back is worth more. Here is what Google does not want you thinking about. Android tracks you. Every search query, every location ping, every app you open, every dollar you spend feeds a machine built to predict your behavior and sell that prediction to advertisers. Google's entire revenue structure depends on knowing where you go, who you talk to, and what you look at, for how long. You are not the customer on an Android phone. You are the product. And it gets worse when you look at the App Store economics. Google and Apple take 30% of every transaction processed through their platforms. Every in-app purchase, every subscription, every digital product. 30 cents of every dollar goes to the platform before a developer sees anything. Epic Games went to legal war with Apple over exactly this. Spotify has publicly stated that the fee structure makes competitive pricing nearly impossible. Some developers working with Linux mobile platforms operate on commissions between 5% and 15%. The math is not complicated. That gap is driving a migration that is only accelerating. Now look at what Linux phones actually offer. The Librem 5 has hardware kill switches. Physical switches that cut power to the camera, microphone, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cellular modem at the circuit level. Not a software toggle. Not an app permission you are supposed to trust. A physical break that makes it impossible for any app, any corporate tool, or any government backdoor to access those components while the switch is flipped off. When Apple says your camera is off, you are trusting software. When the Librem 5 switch is off, the hardware has zero electricity going to it. That is a completely different category. Not privacy by policy. Privacy by physics. Battery life and performance are two things nobody is being honest about. Android stacks the Java Virtual Machine, Google Play services, manufacturer customization, and constant background telemetry on top of the Linux kernel. Every one of those layers costs processing power and drains your battery. Linux phones strip all of that out. The result is a device on mid-range hardware responding faster and lasting longer, because it is not running surveillance infrastructure in the background. Your phone battery is not dying because your phone is old. It is dying because your phone is constantly harvesting data and sending it away. Then there is Waydroid. This single tool destroyed the biggest argument against Linux phones. Critics always said, "Where is WhatsApp? Where is your banking app?" Waydroid runs Android apps inside a container on a Linux system. Not slow emulation, containerized Android running on the same Linux kernel that Android already uses. The app gap critics predicted simply does not exist the way they said it would. You keep access to familiar apps while the underlying system stays completely open-source Linux. Governments already made this calculation. France runs over 103,000 computers on a custom Ubuntu-based Linux distribution across its national gendarmerie. Germany's state of Schleswig-Holstein is replacing 30,000 Microsoft Windows installations with Linux and LibreOffice. Denmark's Ministry of Digital Affairs announced in June 2025 a full transition away from Microsoft Office. Switzerland passed legislation requiring government software to be open source and committed $231 million toward a national cloud designed to keep data inside its own borders. These are not ideological moves. They are digital sovereignty decisions. A government running operations on software controlled by a foreign corporation has a fundamental security vulnerability. Linux is the only platform where every single line of code can be audited by your own team. China made the same call at massive scale. Huawei's Harmony OS, built on Linux architecture, is deployed across hundreds of millions of devices. By the first quarter of 2025, Huawei became the best-selling smartphone brand in China with a 19% market share. That is not a consumer trend. That is a country deciding to own its own digital infrastructure. Bill Gates understood platform markets better than almost anyone alive. He said it himself in 2019, "There is room for exactly one non-Apple operating system." He was right. He just never imagined the one to win would be free, open source, built by a global community, and already running inside the very device that replaced him. Android is Linux. And now Linux is coming for Android. Same story, one layer deeper. If you have ever felt like your phone belongs to someone else, that feeling is correct. And for the first time, there is a real way out. Drop in the comments what is stopping you from making the switch. I will address the top responses in the next video.
I'm Sam Tucker from Macro Hard. And you may have heard recently that Huawei have just announced their new Harmony OS for desktop. Sort of like Windows if...
Bill Gates said it himself in a 2019 interview. He called losing the mobile operating system market his single greatest mistake. His exact words were, "There is room for exactly one non-Apple operating system." He was right. He just never imagined the operating system that would take everything would be Linux. And right now, in 2026, that same story is playing out again on the desktop, and Bill Gates is watching it happen in real time. Here is what people get wrong about Linux. They think it is a niche tool for programmers sitting in dark rooms. It is not. Linux is a kernel, the core engine that sits between software and hardware. Android runs on the Linux kernel. So does Chrome OS. So does the software inside your smart TV. So does the firmware inside most of the world's internet routers. Android alone controls nearly 73% of the global smartphone market with approximately 3.9 billion users worldwide. Linux did not lose the platform war. Linux already won it. The only battlefield left was the personal computer desktop, and that battlefield just changed forever. On October 14, 2025, Microsoft officially ended support for Windows 10. No more security patches, no more bug fixes, nothing. That forced every Windows 10 user to make a choice. Upgrade to Windows 11, pay for extended support, buy new hardware, or walk away. The problem is Windows 11 locked out a massive number of people. According to research firm Connolly's, approximately 240 million computers running Windows 10 do not meet the hardware requirements for Windows 11. Those machines are not broken. They are not slow. They simply lack a TPM 2.0 chip or a processor new enough to satisfy Microsoft's checklist. For the people who own those machines, Linux became the obvious answer. It is free, it runs on older hardware, and in 2025 it is more user-friendly than it has ever been. Zorin OS, a distribution built specifically for people migrating from Windows, reported over 780,000 Windows users switching to their platform as the Windows 10 end-of-life deadline approached. Right now Linux sits at roughly 4% of the global desktop market. Windows holds around 71%. That gap is real, and anyone telling you Linux has already flipped the desktop is exaggerating. But 4% is not the story. The direction is the story. Analysts tracking these figures project Linux could reach 6% of the global desktop market by late 2026. The Linux operating system market commercially, including enterprise and cloud, was valued at $21.97 billion in 2024 and is projected to hit $99.69 billion by 2032, growing at roughly 21% annually. That is not a hobby anymore. That is an industry. Gaming was always the strongest argument for staying on Windows. That argument is collapsing. Valve, the company behind the Steam gaming platform, built a compatibility layer called Proton that allows Windows games to run on Linux without modification. Then Valve released the Steam Deck, a handheld gaming device running Steam OS, a Linux-based system built on Arch Linux. The results showed up in Steam's own data. Linux usage among PC gamers hit 3.05% in October 2025, the highest level since Steam added Linux support over a decade earlier. Gaming on Linux is not perfect yet. Some titles with specific anti-cheat software still cause problems. But the wall that kept gamers locked to Windows is crumbling fast. Governments are not waiting to see how this